culture, creativity, talent. Today, we are in a golden age for British culture, one that could rival any other time in our history. In television, UK programmes are being exported across the world. We've had 74 British Oscar winners since 2010. English football is a language that every country in the world seems to be fluent in, attracting fans from Santiago to Seoul. As the Culture Secretary, I'm proud to have portfolio responsibility for our creative industries, including our film, our TV, gaming, music, and fashion industries. Our companies, our innovators, our creators, our artists are putting a British stamp on every creative industry on the world stage. In this room today, we've got some of the people and businesses who encapsulate our reputation for excellence. Music executive Amanda Ghost, an artist who has co-written songs with Beyoncé. Sir Lucian Grange, CEO of Universal Music, who has pioneered new and innovative business models in the industry, whilst signing global superstars and getting a star himself on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Anya Goldmarch, who made the reusable bag cool and used her creativity to design handbags, but also innovate new sustainable fabrics to make handbags. I believe that although we may be too self-deprecating to admit it, the secret ingredient to our thriving creative industries is in large part innate British talent. Brits have always found ways to challenge convention, to push boundaries, to upend the accepted status quo. Mary Quant's invention of the miniskirt, Johnny Ive's design of the iPhone, Andrew Lloyd-Webber, who is one of a select group of people to have received Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Awards. Today, we export that creative zest all over the world in our music, television, film, theatre, fashion, literature, video games, and others. And here at home, that talent is backed by the government at every opportunity. Consecutive Conservative governments have recognised the potential that exists across our creative industry, and they've recognised the enormous dedication and determination of the businesses and people in these sectors. We've been supporting and stimulating our creative industries with tax reliefs for over a decade, from film to animation to video games to theatre. These tax reliefs have helped to attract significant global investment into the UK. And our approach has always been to recognise that we succeed when we work together. It's a partnership. The government cannot guarantee success, but we can help to create the conditions and a framework that fosters it. And when you succeed, we succeed. And working with international partners is an important part of that partnership. Just look at Barbie, a film recorded in the UK that supported 750 jobs, added £80 million to our economy, and earned over £1.1 billion at the global box office. That is what this summit today is all about. Creating partnerships, seizing opportunities to invest, and tapping into that spark of creative British creativity. And as you saw at the autumn statement last week, we are committed to growing our creative industries long into the future, building on our existing foundations and continuing to succeed together. I look forward to talking with as many of you as possible today and in the future about how we continue to do that. And now I would like to introduce Oliver Dowden, our Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Lucy, for that introduction. In fact, in this room, you've got a bit of a culture club going on because we have the current Culture Secretary. I served as Culture Secretary, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's in the front row, served as Culture Secretary as well. So if you needed any reassurance about our commitment to the creative industries in this country, you can see it in this room today. And our sector, and this sector, could not succeed without the kind of investment that you've seen from the Chancellor and the commitment that you've seen from Lucy Frazer as Culture Secretary. And it's such a huge pleasure for me to play my role in promoting our wonderful creative industries. And whether it's in the fields of music or sport or theatre or literature or indeed creative endeavours generally, so often, and indeed almost always, the United Kingdom is there at the very top table. And we rightly take huge pride in our creative industries. But of course, it's not just the joy of the creative industries, it's that hard economic edge as well. Just a couple of statistics. The UK creative industries contributed over £100 billion in GVA to the economy last year. Or if you take the stats about exports, over £30 billion worth of creative exports last year. But also, they're a way of showcasing the UK and the people involved in it being ambassadors for the United Kingdom. And that's why it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce this highly distinguished panel of ambassadors for our creative industries. Starting, I think, we'll go in the order I have here. Professor Neil Ferguson, we have Thomas Heatherwick, we have Anya Goldmarch, we have Lord Lloyd-Webber, and we have Richard Masters. And between them, please. And between them, they span the whole panoply of the UK's cultural and creative endeavour. From Sherlock Holmes to James Bond and Harry Potter, these ideas have transformed the UK into the world's largest exporter, for example, of physical books, over 3.8 billion books exported each year, and they're also the foundation of our film and TV industry, which contributes over £12 billion to our economy. And indeed, you can see that. I see this in my own constituency. There's actually an arc that goes through Hertfordshire and northwest London. There's more film and television content produced in that arc than there is in Hollywood. That's a sign of the UK creative industry. So there's a lot for us to discuss. I'm going to ask each panel member to say a few words, and then we'll have a more open discussion. So perhaps I could start with Professor Neil Ferguson, who not only is a renowned historian, author of over 15 books, but also an award-winning filmmaker with an Emmy for his series, The Ascent of Money. Neil, do you want to kick off with some of your initial reflections and how we can continue to leverage our history, our culture, and our creativity?
Well, thank you very much, Oliver. It's a pleasure to be here and in this distinguished company and with the very distinguished audience. I recognize some distinguished faces amongst you. Obviously, it's not the weather, is it, that draws us back to the UK, nor the central heating. I spent most of the last 20 years working in American universities at NYU, at Harvard, and at Stanford. And I think a really striking feature of the landscape, if you look at higher education globally, is that it's dominated by US universities, and the only contenders are the UK universities. You look at all the top 20 rankings, US News and World Report, Times Higher Education, the Chinese rankings. In the top 20, the only non-US universities are Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, Imperial, and I think that strength in higher education is more and more remarkable because the resources of the top UK universities are so much less than Harvard or Stanford have at their disposal. And a really striking thing which has become clear to me in recent years is that some of the pathologies that have arisen at places like Harvard and Yale haven't arisen in the same way in the UK universities. I know there are some Americans here, some friends of mine. We've seen some pretty crazy scenes at the American elite universities in recent weeks. I found them very depressing. You don't really have that going on at the UK universities. They're more meritocratic. There's less of this sense of indoctrination as the purpose of university life. And that's why the universities in the UK are such attractive universities for people from all over the world. You know, Oliver, there's a great debate about the immigration statistics in the country at the moment. 39% of the people who come from outside the EU to the UK are attracted by the universities. They're coming here to study. So I think the UK has an extraordinary thing to boast about, which is that it punches well above its weight in higher education. And I increasingly find the UK universities more attractive than their American counterparts. I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you for that. And I think that's a really important contribution. And actually, it's not just in the creative industries. If you look, for example, at artificial intelligence or other sectors, the fact that we have 3 or possibly 4 of the world's top 10 universities in the UK just brings that added dimension in terms of the output from those universities, both the skills and the innovation that flows from them. But it's not just that, it's also, I think, the beauty of this nation, whether you can see in the wonderful architecture of Hampton Court or our rolling hills, our beautiful waterfronts, creativity and design plays such an important role in the UK's strength in this sector. So I'm very pleased to welcome Thomas Heatherwick, who I think probably embodies that, one of the UK's most prolific designers, a truly global presence whose work can be admired from Tokyo to Shanghai to New York and, of course, here in London. Thomas, could you give us some of your thoughts about how heritage has influenced the designs you've placed around the world?
Well, thrilling to be here. I suppose I wanted to talk about 2 things, but really they both come down to a humanness, really. To me, there's 2 really powerful things about the UK that I can't really shake off. In that it's amazing to talk about how financially successful something can be and how efficient logistics and all of those sides of things. But these 2 sides is that really good businesses ultimately are based on ideas. And where do ideas come from? So that's one side. And the other side is humans are driven by emotion, not just numbers. And so we are cultural animals. We love to be in places that stimulate us and connect with us. And we've had a sort of dehumanizing revolution going on around the world in so many cities and towns. And one thing we're so lucky with here is the depth of culture, the depth of history has somehow, almost like the laying up of peat, or the sort of the nutritious layer that I learnt about really most clearly when we were commissioned to build the British Pavilion at the World Expo in Shanghai in 2010. And we were all, at the same moment, all over the planet, different design teams were being given the same brief. You know, show that Bulgaria is a good country to live in, is diverse, show that Australia is, show that the UK is, every country was saying that they're good for tourism, that they're diverse, that they've got lots of old history, and that they've got good food. Britain was saying it's got good food, which it now does. We were stuck a little bit thinking, well, what's actually a different thing you can say? Because there were going to be 250 pavilions. Everyone had a pitch the size of a football pitch to do their thing. And the British government had given us half the budget of the other Western nations, but had told us, be in the top 5 out of the 250 pavilions. And so we tried to tune in, and we spoke to a friend of the studio who travels constantly and said, what's the thing about Britain? You know, what can we say that might be a fresh thing? Because we can go on about castles and queens again and again, but what's a truer thing that might surprise people? And she said to me, the different thing in the UK is eccentricity. And I remember thinking, we can't say that's why we're doing the British Pavilion, to be eccentric. But that taught me such a lesson. She was just saying, that's that different thing. And when I was little, I thought I wanted to be an inventor. And then I discovered that the word inventing had the word mad next to it. You're a mad inventor. And like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, if any of you have seen that film. But then actually look at the last 20 years, 25 years. The word invention has rocketed forwards. And invention comes actually from the confidence to question and be curious and look from a different angle. And that, to me, is the phenomenal thing in the UK. In just a few miles from here, there are some of the most confident people who aren't embarrassed to look stupid, who will ask the extraordinary question and therefore come up with an unusual approach. And that led us to build the world's biggest ever hairy building. And actually, we worked with Kew Gardens that gave us 250,000 seeds. So we made the Seed Cathedral. And even though we had half the budget of the other Western nations, we won the top prize at the Expo because we dared to not say the obvious things that everyone expected us to say. And I think Britain at its best has invention, has that ability for the maverick thought that actually is where businesses come from, and innovation, and what you want your employees to do, especially as we now have the rapid advance of AI. So for me, it's these two things. The place itself and us all needing culture to anyone, whatever you do, and then actually ideas being the future.
Well, thank you. And do you know what? I often think, and I don't know whether you remember this during the Platinum Jubilee, that marvellous moment when Her late Majesty was in conversation with Paddington Bear. And I just thought only the United Kingdom could do that. And that was the sort of fusion of history, culture and creativity together. I'm now going to ask Anya, you to come in. I'm conscious we're already, the clock is beginning to tick rapidly. Some of your reflections, given your huge experience as a business leader, label owner, and creative force, and bringing together luxury and sustainability under one roof. Perhaps you can add some of this.
Well, we're not very good, us Brits, at showing off, are we? But I think I feel lucky. I think you said the word lucky. And I echo that because it's a great place, I think, to be able to be creative and to have a business in the UK. Geographically, it's incredibly central between the East and the West in terms of time zones, language, our laws are internationally respected around the world. And we do have this amazing, I think it's the mix, as you say, of history and modernity, where you really have that sense of being grounded and yet inspired at the same time. And that is very, very inspiring, I think, for creatives. I think that is probably why we have that confidence that you spoke about. I think that coupled with incredible institutions like our artistic schools, our museums, all of which really are hugely inspiring and they make it a very fertile place to work, really. So it's a very lucky place to be. And 1 in 5 jobs in London is in the creative sector. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal. So it's a great place to work in the creative industries.
Well, thank you. And actually, you talked about the skills. That's another thing. I think some of the world's top fashion colleges, I think at least 6 of the top 20 are in the UK. Again, that link between education and creativity. Perhaps I could bring Lord Lloyd-Webber in now. I think Lord Lord Lloyd-Webber needs no introduction, and we spent a lot of time working together during the pandemic. What I would say is remind you that the British government put its money where its mouth was during the pandemic with the £2 billion Cultural Recovery Fund and indeed our commitment to sports as well. So there's been some talk of limited budgets. We were willing to put our money where our mouth was when it was really needed. But over to you, Lord Lloyd-Webber.
Well, the first thing, Oliver, I'm going to ask you a question, because this is always interesting to see. I could ask the Chancellor the question, but I'm going to ask you. The Lion King is one of the most successful movies of all time. Its worldwide current gross is a staggering $970 million. What do you think the gross of The Lion King in the theatre currently is?
Well, I should say I've had a bit of advance warning on this because this is a point that Andrew would frequently make to me when I was Culture Secretary. So I'm unlike some of you may go below 900 million. I'm going to go above 900 million and go for about 3 billion.
It's $10.2 billion.
That gives you some sense of the scale.
That is what theatre can do. And that is why... that is why I'm thrilled and honoured to be here, because we have some of the major investors in the world. We also have with 3 former chancellors who I can say we have to thank the Prime Minister for when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer for introducing the first meaningful tax break for theatre, which I do hope will continue. But we need, theatre produces for every pound, this is a statistic I got last week for London, for every pound that it generates in the theatre, it generates 1.4 pounds in the local economy. And theatre is, in my view, in the UK, an incredibly exciting and good investment. Broadway, sadly, and my first show ever to be put on stage was Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway in 1971. So I love Broadway, but it's now almost a vanity project, and the only shows that can really survive on Broadway are things that, like The Lion King or Hamilton, which are so huge that they can more than break even. But to put a musical on Broadway now would cost roughly $20 million. And I was speaking yesterday to Nick Scandalios, who runs the Nederlander organization, and we were just talking about the possibility of My Sunset Boulevard going this production to Broadway. And he was pointing out that the rough gross on Broadway, which it needs to break even on a musical now, is $970, very nearly $1 million a week. I mean, it's not a business. You can't, I mean, and that's why we are now producing shows in London, like the fantastic little musical, which I do suggest you go to, called The Little Big Things, which only Britain could come up with something like that. A musical, I mean, so moving that it's impossible to really put into words, but it's about the boy who was paralyzed from the neck downwards in a diving accident in Spain and learnt to paint with his mouth. And that's what the musical's about. Now, you're not going to find work like that coming on in any other place than London or the West End. So I passionately ask for 2 things, that the theatre is supported by government, a little more perhaps than it is at the moment, and I also passionately ask you, if you are thinking of investing, think of Britain first and think of our theatre.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And I think there's a sort of theme coming from this discussion about the uniqueness of how we do things in Britain. Alongside the creativity, there's been some talk about the need for additional investment. I think perhaps one area that has had an awful lot of investment, indeed thanks to many of you in this room, is the Premier League. When I go around the world as a minister, I'm always asked 2 things. Have you met the King or the Queen as was, and which Premier League team do you support? That is a sign of the cultural reach of the Premier League, and I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Masters, the man in charge of the Premier League. Welcome your thoughts and reflections on all of this.
Well, thank you for having me. A few words on the world of sport, and of course the UK is an incredible sporting nation, football is the world sport, and English football is a very big player in the world of football. In fact, our research shows the Premier League, the world's most watched league, it is the single institution or single entity which makes the most people feel positive about the UK. So that's my little statistic. I'm particularly proud of that one. As you say, the Premier League's been very successful in attracting inward investment, both in terms of media rights from all around the world. We're telecast in over 180 territories, but also in terms of foreign ownership, with half of our clubs now being owned by foreign owners. Some people might say that's a bit controversial thing, but I think it's a good thing for the game. So how has the Premier League become such a successful football competition? It's done it because it's made itself relevant and interesting to a global audience at a time when football fans around the world have had almost ubiquitous access to live football. And we've done that in three ways, I think. We've ruthlessly focused on a great football competition. So we have some of the best players from around the world, the best coaches from around the world, melded with our homegrown talent and packed stadia. And we have a way of sharing money, which means everyone has a chance. So we have that incredibly important quality of jeopardy. So you don't know what's going to happen when you watch the match. Secondly, we lost my thread.
Man City doesn't always.
We've also looked for global appeal. So there's 3 billion people that support Premier League clubs from around the world. We're obviously extremely proud of that. £1.5 billion in export revenue coming in to Premier League productions. 300 people working down in Stockley Park. They are the greatest exporter you've never heard of. And finally, I think that we value authenticity. We've talked about that on the panel already. So football clubs are now global brands, but they're also deeply rooted in their communities. I'm from Birmingham. There are 2 clubs in that city. Aston Villa was set up in the 1870s, and the Villa fan out there, in the 1870s by the Wesleyan Chapel of
down
Villa,
the line of shout-outs for football.
which is where it gets its name from. But now it's owned by an American and Egyptian businessman. Brazilians, Spaniards, and Jamaicans take the field, but it's still the people of Birmingham that pack the stands, and that is incredibly valuable as well. So it's all of those things, I think, which add up to such successful products.
Well, it's interesting, and actually I think there's what you're hearing there, and indeed from all the panellists, is the deep-rooted nature of culture in this country as well. Indeed, it's something I saw when we were discussing the fortunately ill-fated plans for the European Super League. It's only the fact that our culture has the roots in this country that gives it its strength. But I was thinking as we were going across this panel, and we're already running out of time, but we have strength in the creative industries. Another area we have huge strength in the UK, and I'm sure you'll hear about this later today, is in technology. And indeed, the last major summit we had was in relation to artificial intelligence, another area where I believe the UK is as world-leading as it is in creative industries. I'd be interested in the panel's reflections on the synthesis between those two, between creativity and artificial intelligence. Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? How do you see that playing out? I don't know who would like to go first. Neil, do you want to go first?
I think it's just fascinating that the UK it's all relevant in the discussion, because in terms of compute, there are only 2 AI superpowers, United States and China. But if you think about the real innovators in the sector, 2 of the most important figures in my view are Demis Hassabis and Mustafa Suleyman. And they are really, it seems to me, amongst the most important figures in the sector. So AI is something to which Britain's already made massive contributions. I think Mustafa's book is the best book on the subject. If you haven't read his book, I think you've missed out. And although everybody wants to talk about Sam Altman, I think Demis Hassabis is probably the single most important innovator, the data scientist who really made AI happen. And that's extraordinarily important. It's a little bit like Bletchley Park in World War II. In terms of scale, the United States and the Soviet Union were more important than the United Kingdom in World War II. But without Bletchley Park, it's not clear that the Allies would have won. That would be the analogy I would draw.
And I completely agree with that. And Thomas, do you want to come to it? Because I know indeed, we were at an event where you showed me your design for an automated car, which was totally radical. And I know you've engaged a lot with tech and creativity. What are your reflections on this?
We've been very lucky to work with Google over the last 9 years, building their headquarters in King's Cross as well as in Mountain View, where some of the amazing innovators of DeepMind and some of those teams are having some incredible meetings at the moment and working out what the future could be. But I think we've been using artificial intelligence in many ways in all our architecture projects for a long time. It's jumped to another level. But I do think that we don't need to panic in the same way, because it's true that you can ask it to do something and it can create building designs quickly, it can do all sorts of things. But the best projects come from actually innovation in the question that you ask. And often when somebody asks us for, like we've just finished a new island in New York that's a park, but we weren't asked to design an island. We were asked to design a pavilion on an existing design. But when we weighed up the use of the money that was about to be spent and the human experience that was actually the goal, we realized that there was a different question to ask, which wasn't what they thought they'd asked us. But if you'd asked a computer, they would have designed all sorts of options for the building instead of reinventing it as a new island. And so I think we just forget that it's the curiosity of asking the right question and stepping strategically right back. It's not just random creativity, it's strategy that leads to actually the best innovation.
Thank you. Well, look, I'm conscious we have already run out of time. We could continue this conversation for a very long period of time. I hope that it has stimulated your thoughts. I don't want to keep you waiting for the next session, which is the Prime Minister back again. I don't want to get in trouble with him. So I'm going to have to wrap up the panel now. But please, will you join me in giving your thanks to this brilliant panel of contributors?